So I have my material laid out here, and I've cut it to roughly the right lengths. It's all a little bit long based on this one, and so I only had to cut the other ones, and I could have cut them down to 17 inches, but then I would have had about 4 inches extra that I was throwing away, and so instead I made them approximately the same length as this white board. So it turns out I'll be able to have just a little bit bigger cutting board when I get done, instead of just throwing that other material away. So I've got my material cut, and I'm ready to rip them down on the table saw based on my measurements off my drawing. And I was just about to get started here when I picked up this board I had picked out originally, and I laid it down. And I found out right away that this one has quite the twist to it. And so if I was to run this through the table saw, I would push down, and at about halfway through it would rock back the other direction, and that would create my blade to change the angle on this wood, and so it wouldn't have a straight edge anymore. And so instead of being able to just run this through the table saw, because it's not flat on the table, I'm going to have to either take it to the planer or take it to the joiner first and fix that. Same thing happened with my pieces of walnut here. They're even cooler. They both start at a different thickness. They go down to a little bit thinner, and then they come back up. They also have the same wobble, and not only that, but they have some deformation this way as well. There's a little bit of oblong cupping going on. So I've got some serious issues going on with each of these pieces of wood. But the good news is the joiner is going to solve that problem for me, or the planer if I hot glue it to a board. So I'm going to take this over and do that next before I come back and do all my cutting. So this one has about a 1/4 inch wobble in it, which means if I level that out about an 1/8 inch on each side. So I grabbed some pieces of scrap wood out of the scrap bin that are just under an 1/8 inch. So I'm going to put those in there, and then put an 1/8 inch on each side approximately. I've got a nice dense piece of wood underneath that's flat, and so now I can get this leveled up to that point. So I put those in there, and now I'm just going to put some glue in on each side to hold that in place. And it doesn't need to be much glue at all. I've had kids put in a little more than was needed, and it takes you a lot longer to take it off. So I usually put in 3 sections on each side of about a 1/2 inch long glue. Make sure you glue wherever your shim is. So I'm going to put that, I'm going to glue the shim, and then I make sure some glue goes underneath this board as well so it doesn't compress on you. And then let that dry, and then you're ready to run it through the planer. Once you get this top side flat, then you can pop the glue back off, flip it over, and you can flatten the bottom side. These are not very far off, and so I'm just going to run these through the joiner instead. Alright, this board doesn't have too much wobble in it, but it's just enough that it's going to affect the cut on the table saw. And for the table saw, we need very straight perpendicular cuts so that when we glue it together, it's not twisting our cutting board. When I send this through the joiner, the thing you need to remember is to hold your weight to one side. If I go through pushing on one side and then I come out and I push on the other side, it's going to keep that same wobble. It's not going to clean it up at all. So I need to push down on one side, send the whole piece through with that same pressure on one side so it can clean it and leave a flat plane. And once I have a flat plane on one side, then I can either go to the planer and make it parallel, which I don't need to do, or I can flip it up once I have a flat edge and put it against the fence and make another flat edge, square edge for the table saw. I'm going to take my pencil on the bottom side of this and put marks everywhere so that I know exactly where I've cut and where I haven't cut once it goes through. So now that I got my boards flat and ready to go, I've lined them here, and then based on my drawing, I've written down, I know that I want a 2-inch out of walnut, so I write a 2 on that, another 2-inch out of walnut, and then maple 1/4 inch. And so I've written down each of my measurements that I want on these boards so that I don't get confused as I'm cutting. So now that they're laid out, ready to cut, I'm going to have to adjust my blade for the height of each of these, so you'll see that as I go along. I've also laid out a secondary push stick. This one has already been sacrificed, and it's got only a 1/4 inch of material on the back side left to push with. When I go cut my 1/4 inch pieces, I'm going to be using this push stick and my 1/2 inch pieces. This one is set up at 3/4 or 5/8, so I'm going to be using that for my bigger pieces and that one for the smaller, for more control.